The night everything collided.
At first glance, it looks like chaos without meaning. A shirtless teenager, a loaded handgun, a parking lot security camera, and a single moment so bizarre, it almost feels unreal. He pulls a gun from his waistband, unloads it, throws it on the ground, does a backflip, and runs into the darkness. But this isn't a prank. This isn't a dare. And this isn't just another strange night on a college campus. Because less than 2 hours later, police will step through an open window into a dorm room and find a 14-year-old boy dead, hanging from a chair in a pool of blood. This is the story of how an ordinary summer night at the University of New Mexico unraveled into one of the most disturbing campus crime scenes investigators had ever faced, and how a series of missed connections, delayed responses, and unanswered calls allowed a child to die alone.
The first call.
At approximately 1:30 a.m. on July 25, 2025, a 911 dispatcher in Albuquerque answers a call that, on the surface, doesn't sound urgent. The caller is a mother. Her voice is controlled, but strained. Her name is Lionel Lamont. She explains that her stepson just called her, saying something was wrong at the University of New Mexico. There had been gunshots. He and 2 others ran from a dorm room. And now, her biological son, 14-year-old Michael Lamont, is missing. Michael is 1 week away from his 15th birthday. The dispatcher asks routine questions. Did they see anything? Were they involved? Lina says no. As far as she knows, they only heard gunfire. But there's a problem. Michael never came out with them. As the call is transferred to the UNM Police Department, Lina doesn't yet know that officers are already responding to something else entirely. Alarms triggered by shattered glass at a building called Mesa Vista Hall, just across from student dorms. 2 incidents. Same campus. Same night. No one yet realizes they are connected.
The parking lot incident.
Minutes later, another call comes in. This time, it's from 2 young adults sitting inside a car near the campus tennis courts. They report something deeply unsettling. A shirtless male approached their vehicle,
Try to speak to them.
then suddenly produced a firearm. According to the caller, the man unloaded the weapon, discarded it, and then fled. When officers pull up security footage from the parking lot, what they see defies logic. The suspect removes the magazine, racks the slide, throws the gun to the ground, performs a backflip, then runs. Even more alarming, he comes back for the gun. The suspect is wearing light-colored jeans, no shirt, and appears agitated, erratic, and possibly intoxicated. Police now believe they're dealing with an armed individual who could be anywhere on campus. The night officially becomes dangerous.
A body on the roof.
While officers begin searching the grounds, a tip comes in from Albuquerque Police Department. A 19-year-old male has been FaceTiming his parents from the roof of a campus building. He claims he's been drugged, that he passed out, that he doesn't know how he got there. When officers arrive on the rooftop, something catches their attention immediately. A pair of pants, light-colored jeans. The same one seen in the parking lot footage. Then blood. A trail of it. Drops leading away from the roof, across concrete, into grass, toward the center of campus. The officers go quiet. This isn't vandalism. This isn't a prank. Someone is bleeding badly. And possibly dying.
A mother still waiting.
While police chase a blood trail in one direction, Lionel Lamont is still waiting for answers in another. Her son has been missing for nearly an hour. She calls UNM police again. She asks the question every parent fears asking. Did you check the apartment? The answer she gets is devastating.
No, not yet.
Officers tell her they're busy handling another missing person. Another missing person. Lina grows frantic. She asks if she's allowed to go look herself. She's told she can, but not to enter. Her voice cracks. She has no idea that the other missing person is the shirtless teen with a gun, and that her son's name is about to be spoken inside a dorm room no one has entered yet.
The hospital connection.
Then everything collides. UNM police receive a call from the university hospital. A 19-year-old student named Daniel Arcoletta has arrived with a gunshot graze wound to the back of his head. He's not alone. He's with Zion Mira, Michael Lamont's older half-brother. When officers interview Zion, the story changes everything. The gunman wasn't a stranger. His name, Zion says, is John Pork, a friend of Daniel's. The four of them, John, Daniel, Zion, and Michael, had been hanging out in Daniel's dorm room, playing video games,
Drinking.
then suddenly, gunfire. Zion describes a bullet flying past his face. Daniel bleeding. Chaos.
Fear.
Michael disappearing. And now police are asking the question no one wants to answer yet. If Daniel and Zion escaped, where is Michael? Despite the mounting evidence, the gunshots, the blood trail, the armed suspect, the injured student, the dorm room where Michael was last seen remains unopened. Minutes turn into an hour. Then nearly 2. Lina arrives on campus herself, pacing outside the student housing complex. She can see the room. The light is on. The window is open. The blinds are broken. Still, no one goes in. When officers finally prepare to breach the room, they do so cautiously, believing the suspect could still be inside. What they find instead is far worse.
The discovery.
Inside the room, silence. Then, shock. A teenage boy is slumped forward in a chair, his head and arms resting on the floor. Blood pooled beneath him. A single gunshot wound through his head. No weapon in sight. No signs of life. At 3:15 a.m., nearly 2 hours after his mother's first call, 14-year-old Michael Lamont is pronounced dead. The child everyone had been searching for was never missing. He was there the entire time.
The boy who ran through blood.
By the time officers realized a 14-year-old boy was dead inside a dorm room, the night had already fractured into too many moving parts. An armed suspect had vanished. Blood trails stretched across campus. Parents were calling non-stop. And somewhere in all that chaos, the person believed to have pulled the trigger was still bleeding, still running, and still free.
The search for the suspect.
As officers cleared Michael Lamont's dorm room, attention immediately shifted back to the other half of the nightmare still unfolding outside. Because the shooter hadn't disappeared into thin air. He had left something behind.
Blood.
Not a few drops. Not a smear. But a trail, thin, scattered, deliberate, leading away from the rooftop of Mesa Vista Hall. Officers follow it carefully, illuminating the ground with flashlights, narrating their observations out loud. The drops form a pattern. Teardrop-shaped. Consistent. Someone is bleeding badly but not slowing down. As they track the trail, officers discuss what they already know. The suspect was shirtless, wearing light-colored jeans, acting erratically, possibly under the influence of drugs, and in possession of a firearm moments earlier. The concern now isn't just public safety. It's survival. One officer says it plainly. I hope this dude's not bleeding out.
The rooftop pants.
Security footage helps fill in the gaps. Earlier that night, cameras captured the suspect climbing onto the roof, stripping off his jeans and leaving them behind, the same jeans seen in the parking lot footage. From that point forward, he's only wearing boxers. Barefoot. Injured. Jogging. As blood drips from his arms, he moves through the campus with eerie calm, passing empty police cruisers, slipping through blind spots, and never once collapsing. The footage is chilling. Not because it's fast, but because it isn't. This isn't panic. It's momentum. The missed interception. One camera records something investigators would later replay again and again. A dark pickup truck enters a parking lot near the suspect's path. Before it even comes to a full stop, a woman jumps out. She runs toward him, wraps him in a hug, and ushers him into the passenger seat. The truck pulls away. 10 minutes later, police arrive at the same spot, unaware they've just missed the suspect by moments. No license plate is captured. No description of the driver. No idea who helped him escape. What they do know is devastating. The man they were chasing is gone. Another mother calls. Back at dispatch, the phones don't stop ringing. Then another call comes in, different mother, same desperation. She says her son is missing. That he told her earlier he had overdosed. That he was on a rooftop. That he wasn't right. Her son's name is John Fuentes. This is when police finally realize what's been unfolding all night. The armed suspect. The man bleeding through campus. The shirtless teen on the roof. They're all the same person. And he's only 18 years old. Identity confirmed. Officers begin piecing together the timeline. Zion Mira, the older half-brother of Michael, had originally referred to the shooter as John Pork. But records confirm his real name, John Fuentes. Not a UNM student. Recently turned 18. No violent criminal history. But now, suspected of killing a child. Police learned that John had been hanging out at Daniel Archuleta's dorm frequently.
Drugs.
Alcohol. Late nights. And now, gunfire. The campus spirals. As dawn approaches, the University of New Mexico campus begins waking up, unaware that it has quietly become a crime scene. Multiple locations are unsecured. Blood is still visible in plazas and walkways. The shooter hasn't been caught. The decision is made. The campus goes into lockdown. UNM police request assistance from Albuquerque PD and the New Mexico National Guard. Parents call in panic. Orientation groups are halted. Students are told to shelter in place. And the local news breaks the story before many families even know what's happened. The gun is found. Hours later, during a daylight sweep of Mesa Vista Hall's rooftop, an officer spots something that had been missed in the darkness. A handgun, a Glock 19, 9mm. Alongside it, a set of keys. The firearm is immediately run through the system. It's stolen. This confirms what investigators feared. The shooting wasn't impulsive chaos with a legally owned weapon. It involved a stolen gun, one that had been passed around. But even with the gun recovered, one question remains unanswered. If John Fuentes didn't bring a gun with him, whose gun was it? The family learns the truth. While investigators work the scene, Michael Lamont's family is finally brought to the police station. There, in a quiet room, Lionel Lamont hears the words no parent ever recovers from. Her son is gone. 14 years old. Shot in the head. Left alone. His sister Erica breaks down immediately. Sobs turn to screams. Michael's father, Mark, learns the truth over the phone. His voice collapses. He asks questions no one can answer. Was Michael scared? Was he alone? Was he in pain? Police try to comfort them, but there is no comfort. Only disbelief. Only guilt. Only anger. A case far from simple. As the sun rises fully, one thing becomes clear to investigators. This is not a simple shooting.
This is not a stranger crime.
This is not a random act. Every person involved knew each other, and nearly everyone left Michael behind. John Fuentes is still missing. Daniel Archuleta refuses to talk. Zion Mira's story doesn't quite line up. And somewhere in the middle of it all lies a dorm room, a stolen gun, and a 14-year-old boy who should never have been there. This case isn't over. It's just beginning.
When silence became evidence.
As detectives step out of the interview rooms, they're no longer asking what happened. They're asking why no one helped. Because by now, the evidence is speaking louder than the people involved. Phone data becomes the backbone of the investigation. Investigators subpoena records from all three surviving individuals, Daniel Archuleta, Zion Mira, and John Fuentes. What they find contradicts nearly every version of events told during questioning. Text messages sent after the gunshot show panic, but not urgency. No one texts 911. No one asks for help. No one mentions Michael by name. Instead, messages focus on escape. Get out. Go now. He's tripping. Detectives pause on that last phrase. He's tripping. Not someone's hurt. Not we need help. Not a kid was shot. Just run. Investigators reconstruct the dorm room digitally. Using measurements, bullet trajectory, blood spatter patterns, and furniture placement, they determine something chilling. Michael Lamont was not near the window. He was seated. And when the gun fired, he was positioned lower than the shooter. That means the bullet didn't ricochet. It didn't misfire. It traveled directly downward. This doesn't automatically mean intent, but it destroys the idea of randomness. The room falls silent as the reconstruction finishes. One detective finally says what everyone is thinking. This wasn't chaos. This was negligence stacked on negligence. Attention shifts back to John Fuentes, now the central figure. Medical records from the hospital confirm John suffered a gunshot wound to the arm. The bleeding explains the trail. The erratic behavior explains the rooftop. But toxicology tells another story. John had multiple substances in his system. Alcohol, THC, psilocybin, a volatile combination. Enough to impair judgment, but not enough to erase responsibility. And then there's the question investigators can't ignore. Why did John return for the gun? Security footage clearly shows him running away, then coming back, then leaving again. That decision alone changes everything. It suggests awareness. Awareness that a gun left behind connects people. Awareness that consequences were coming. Meanwhile, pressure mounts on Daniel and Zion. Detectives bring them back in separately. This time, they don't ask questions. They show evidence. Photos. Messages. Timelines. Daniel's posture changes. His confidence collapses. He begins correcting himself mid-sentence. Zion stops answering altogether and asks for a lawyer. That moment marks the end of cooperation and the beginning of accountability. Prosecutors are briefed. They review the case with one question in mind. Who failed a legal duty? Michael Lamont was a minor. He was not a student. He was inside a college dorm after midnight. Alcohol and drugs were present. A stolen firearm was accessible. That creates liability. Not just moral. Legal. And suddenly, this isn't just about the trigger pull. It's about endangerment, reckless conduct, and depraved indifference. As days pass, the public begins asking questions. Why was a 14-year-old allowed on campus housing? Why did it take nearly 2 hours to enter the room? Why wasn't the campus immediately secured? UNM releases a statement. It's carefully worded. Regret without responsibility. Sympathy without answers. Michael's family isn't satisfied. They want names. They want timelines. They want accountability. And they want the world to know their son didn't just die. He was abandoned. John Fuentes is eventually located, not through police work, but through family negotiation. He turns himself in, not out of remorse, but on advice of counsel. When he walks into custody, his injuries are healed. His silence is complete. No statement. No apology. No explanation. Just a signature. And cuffs. By the end of Chapter 3, investigators understand the truth will not come easily. No one wants to be the last person who saw Michael alive. No one wants to admit they ran. And no one wants to say out loud that fear mattered more than a child's life. But the evidence doesn't forget.
Phones don't lie.
Cameras don't blink. And silence, when examined closely, becomes its own confession.
When the law finally stepped in.
By the time John Fuentes is taken into custody, the case has already outgrown the crime scene. What began as a chaotic night on a college campus has now become a legal reckoning, not just for the shooter, but for everyone who played a role in what happened inside that dorm room. Because the law doesn't just ask who pulled the trigger. It asks who made the choices that led there. John Fuentes turns himself in quietly. No press conference. No statement. No visible emotion. He walks into the station with a lawyer at his side, his earlier injuries healed, his silence intact. Detectives note the contrast immediately. The frantic, bleeding teenager seen on security footage is gone. In his place is a composed young man who understands the gravity of what's coming next. During processing, investigators review the charges they intend to pursue. Second-degree murder. Use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. Tampering with evidence. The weight of those words settles heavily. John says nothing. Prosecutors move fast. They argue that while intoxication may explain erratic behavior, it does not excuse it. That bringing a stolen firearm into a dorm room where a minor was present was inherently dangerous. And that firing that weapon, regardless of intent, created a foreseeable and fatal outcome. But the case doesn't stop with John Fuentes. It expands outward. Attention turns to Daniel Archuleta. The dorm room was his. The gathering happened under his roof. The gun had been there before. Prosecutors examine whether Daniel's actions, or lack of them, rise to criminal negligence. Allowing drugs, alcohol, a stolen firearm, and a minor to coexist in the same space becomes a central focus. Daniel's legal team argues he was a victim. The state argues he was a gatekeeper. And the line between the two becomes dangerously thin. Then there's Zion Mira, Michael's older half-brother. The person Michael likely trusted most in that room. Investigators weigh Zion's decisions carefully. His fear is documented. His hesitation is understood. But prosecutors question whether fear absolves someone of responsibility when a child is left behind. They consider charges related to child endangerment and failure to render aid. The possibility alone sends shockwaves through both families. As charging decisions are debated, the University of New Mexico is forced into the spotlight. Parents demand answers. Why wasn't campus immediately locked down? Why did it take nearly 2 hours to enter the dorm room? Why was a minor allowed into student housing after midnight? UNM releases another statement, longer this time, more legal. Policies are cited. Procedures are referenced. Responsibility is carefully diffused. But public trust erodes quickly. Vigils form on campus lawns. Candles flicker beneath photos of Michael Lamont, a smiling 14-year-old whose life ended in a place meant to represent opportunity and safety. In court filings, prosecutors outline the narrative they intend to present to a jury. A chain of decisions. A stolen gun introduced into a dorm room. Substances impairing judgment. A child placed in harm's way. Panic over accountability. And abandonment over responsibility. They argue Michael Lamont didn't just die from a gunshot wound. He died because no one chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. Defense attorneys push back hard. They argue panic, confusion, youth, lack of intent. They say this was a tragic accident, not a crime born of malice. But prosecutors counter with one simple truth. Accidents don't excuse neglect. And neglect doesn't excuse death. As hearings approach, the case becomes a media fixture. Every filing is analyzed. Every court appearance dissected. Every silence interpreted. Michael's family attends every proceeding. They don't speak to the press. They don't shout. They sit quietly, holding each other, watching the system finally move. Slowly, painfully, but forward. By the end of Chapter 4, one thing is undeniable. This case is no longer about what happened in the dark. It's about what happens next, in courtrooms, in policies, and in the lives of everyone involved. Because when the law finally steps in, it doesn't just look backward. It decides who will carry this night forever.
When truth met the courtroom.
By the time the case reaches the courtroom, the story has already taken on a life of its own. The facts are known. The names are public. And the stakes are no longer theoretical. Now, the question isn't what happened. It's what can be proven. John Fuentes appears before a judge for the first time in silence. He wears jail-issued clothing. His hands are cuffed. His eyes remain fixed straight ahead. There is no visible reaction as the charges are read aloud. Second-degree murder. Firearm enhancement. Tampering with evidence. Each word echoes through the courtroom, landing not just on the defendant, but on everyone seated behind him. Michael Lamont's family sits together in the gallery. They don't cry. They don't speak. They listen. Prosecutors lay out their opening position early. They make it clear this will not be framed as a tragic accident. They argue recklessness. They argue awareness. They argue abandonment. They emphasize that John Fuentes did not simply fire a gun. He fled, returned for the weapon, and accepted help escaping campus while a child lay dying. That sequence, prosecutors argue, demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The defense responds predictably. They describe intoxication, fear, youthful panic. They argue John never intended to kill anyone, least of all a child. But intent, the prosecution reminds the court, is not the only standard. Foreseeability matters. As motions are filed, attention shifts briefly away from John Fuentes and onto the people who survived the night. Daniel Archuleta's legal strategy becomes clear. Distance. His attorneys argue that Daniel was a victim of the shooting, injured, traumatized, and reacting under extreme stress. They push to suppress certain digital evidence, claiming it lacks context and unfairly prejudices the jury. Prosecutors disagree. They argue Daniel controlled the environment, that the gun had been in his dorm room before, that alcohol and drugs were present under his watch, that a 14-year-old boy should never have been there. The judge listens carefully. No rulings yet, but the tension is obvious. Zion Mira's position is more fragile. As Michael Lamont's older half-brother, his presence in the courtroom carries emotional weight. He avoids eye contact with Michael's parents. His legal team emphasizes fear and immaturity. They argue Zion didn't understand the severity of the injury, that he believed Michael had already left. That panic overtook judgment. Prosecutors counter with evidence. Phone records. Timelines. Statements that changed. They argue Zion made a decision to save himself. And that decision had consequences. Behind closed doors, plea discussions begin. Quietly, carefully. Prosecutors consider leverage. Defense attorneys calculate risk. For John Fuentes, the exposure is severe. Decades in prison if convicted. No guarantee of parole. A permanent label. His legal team explores options. Reduced charges. Sentencing recommendations. Acknowledgement of responsibility, without admission of intent. But any plea deal must pass one unavoidable test. Michael Lamont's family. And they are not eager to forgive. As weeks pass, the emotional toll becomes visible. Court appearances blur together. Faces grow tired. The gravity deepens. Michael's mother begins carrying a photo of him to court. She doesn't hold it up. She doesn't show it to cameras. She keeps it close. A quiet reminder of why this matters. Outside the courtroom, the public conversation intensifies. Some argue the charges are too harsh. Others say they don't go far enough. Questions about campus safety resurface. So do questions about parental oversight, youth culture, and access to firearms. The case becomes a mirror. Everyone sees something uncomfortable reflected back. As Chapter 5 closes, one truth becomes unavoidable. Courtrooms don't deliver closure. They deliver process. And for Michael Lamont's family, justice isn't a verdict. It's accountability, spoken out loud, recorded, and remembered. Because no matter how this ends, one fact will never change. Michael Lamont was 14 years old, and he never got to walk out of that room.
When the case began to break.
As the case moves deeper into the legal system, something begins to change. Not in the evidence, not in the facts, but in the people. The weight of what happened, and what could still happen, starts to fracture the carefully constructed defenses that have held until now. John Fuentes' legal strategy shifts first. Behind closed doors, prosecutors make it clear they are prepared to take the case to trial. The evidence, they argue, tells a coherent story, one that a jury will understand. Surveillance footage, phone records, forensic reconstruction, a clear timeline, and a child left behind. For John, the math becomes brutal. If convicted at trial, he faces decades behind bars. If he pleads, there is at least certainty. His attorneys begin pressing him to consider a deal. Responsibility, without admission of intent. Reduced exposure. A chance, however slim, at eventual release. John listens. And for the first time since his arrest, he speaks. Across the aisle, pressure mounts on Daniel Archuleta. Prosecutors signal they may pursue additional charges, depending on testimony. Daniel's status as a victim no longer shields him. His dorm room was the setting. His phone contains damaging material. His silence now looks strategic rather than shocked. Daniel's legal team urges cooperation. They tell him juries are unforgiving when adults place children in danger. Every delay increases risk. Daniel begins to reconsider everything he said and everything he hasn't. For Zion Mira, the pressure is personal. He sits in meetings with attorneys, family members, and counselors. The emotional burden of being Michael Lamont's older half-brother becomes impossible to escape. He didn't pull the trigger, but he was there. And he left. Prosecutors make their position clear. If this goes to trial, Zion will be called. And under oath, inconsistencies will matter. Fear will be questioned. Silence will be challenged. Zion's voice, once steady, begins to break. As trial preparation accelerates, prosecutors refine their narrative. This is not about monsters, they argue. It's about choices. A choice to drink. A choice to bring a gun. A choice to ignore warning signs. A choice to run. They prepare to show jurors a timeline so simple it's devastating. And they know defense attorneys see it too. The first crack comes quietly. A sealed motion is filed. Then another. Whispers of negotiations spread through the courthouse. No announcements. No headlines. But everyone involved knows what it means. The case is moving toward resolution, not through verdict, but through compromise. Michael Lamont's family is informed. They sit together as prosecutors explain the options. A plea avoids trial. It guarantees accountability, but it may reduce punishment. The family listens. They ask hard questions. They don't rush a decision. For them, justice isn't about speed. It's about truth being acknowledged. As Chapter 6 closes, the case stands at a crossroads. One path leads to a jury, uncertainty, testimony, and public scrutiny. The other leads to a courtroom admission, controlled, limited, but final. And for the first time since that night, silence is no longer protecting anyone. It's costing them.
The weight of what remains.
When the courtroom doors finally open again, the energy inside feels different. Not louder, not calmer, heavier. Because by this point, everyone understands something fundamental. No outcome can undo what happened inside that dorm room. No sentence can give Michael Lamont his life back. No ruling can return a family to who they were before that night. What the court can do is acknowledge the truth. And that moment is coming. The first resolution arrives without spectacle. John Fuentes stands before the judge, no longer the confused teenager wandering a rooftop, no longer the frantic voice on the phone claiming he'd been laced, no longer the young man insisting he didn't remember pulling the trigger. Now, he is simply the defendant, and the words spoken in court carry consequences that will follow him for the rest of his life. The charge, second-degree murder. As the plea is entered, the courtroom remains silent. No gasps. No whispers. Just the quiet recognition that the system has reached its conclusion, even if the story itself remains unresolved in many minds. John does not look toward Michael's family. He keeps his eyes forward. Some interpret that as shame, others as fear. Some see it as avoidance. What it truly is may never be known. Sentencing follows weeks later. Prosecutors recount the timeline one final time, not dramatically, but methodically. They speak about choices, access, and responsibility. They remind the court that Michael was 14 years old, that he was not a student, that he should not have been there. They acknowledge intoxication. They acknowledge recklessness. But they do not excuse the outcome. The defense asks for mercy. They point to John's age, his lack of violent criminal history, his cooperation after arrest. They ask the court to believe that what happened was not malice, but chaos. The judge listens, and then speaks. When the sentence is read, it lands with finality. Years. Conditions. Supervision. Enough to mark a life forever. But never enough to satisfy a loss this deep. Michael's family listens without interruption. They have already endured the worst part. For Zion Mira, accountability takes a different form. His charges do not carry the same weight, but they carry a different kind of burden. Tampering with evidence. Contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Possession. The court makes clear that being a victim does not erase responsibility. Zion accepts a plea. In doing so, he avoids trial but not consequence.
His role is documented.
His actions are recorded. His name is permanently attached to the case. And with that comes a reality he cannot escape. He must live knowing that his younger brother followed him and paid the price. Daniel Archuleta's case resolves quietly. No public statements. No emotional testimony. Just filings. Hearings. Conditions. His dorm room will never be just a dorm room again. It is now a place marked by death. As the legal process concludes, attention turns back to the question that never fully leaves the room. How did this happen? Not legally, but practically. How did a 14-year-old end up inside a college dorm, surrounded by drugs, alcohol, and loaded firearms? How did no one stop it? How did fear outweigh responsibility? How did survival become more urgent than calling for help? There are no satisfying answers. Only explanations. Michael Lamont is remembered not as a defendant or a statistic, but as a child, a brother, a son, a kid who liked video games. His family continues forward without closure, but with clarity. They know the truth now. And sometimes, that is all the system can offer. As the case fades from headlines, the campus returns to normal. Students walk the same paths. Dorm rooms refill. Classes resume. But one room will never be occupied again. And one family will never be whole.
The aftermath no one sees.
Long after the courtroom empties and the headlines move on, the consequences of what happened inside that dorm room continue to ripple outward. Not loudly, not visibly, but persistently. Because cases like this don't end when the sentence is handed down. They end in fragments, scattered across families, communities, and institutions that must now reckon with what they allowed to happen. For Michael Lamont's family, life resumes in form but not in substance. Birthdays arrive without celebration. Holidays come with an empty space at the table that no one knows how to fill. Conversations stop mid-sentence when his name is mentioned, not because it's forbidden, but because it hurts too much to finish the thought. They learn to exist in a world that continues to spin, even though they're stopped on one irreversible night. On campus, the administration issues statements. Carefully worded, legally sound, emotionally distant.
Policies are reviewed.
Guest rules are tightened. Safety seminars are scheduled. But none of it addresses the truth students whisper among themselves, that everyone knew parties happened, that alcohol flowed freely, that enforcement depended on timing and luck. The system wasn't broken. It was permissive. Among students, fear briefly replaces indifference. Parents call more often. Dorm doors stay locked. Parties quiet down. But time dulls urgency. New students arrive who never heard Michael's name. The dorm room becomes just another space again, renovated, repainted, reoccupied. Except for those who were there. John Fuentes enters the long stretch of incarceration. The chaos of that night fades into routine, counts, schedules, silence. He has years to think about choices made in seconds. And that reality becomes its own sentence. Zyamira tries to rebuild something resembling normal life. But accountability doesn't disappear once paperwork is signed. Every job application, every background check, every casual question about the past. The story follows him, not as a headline but as a shadow. Daniel Archuleta retreats from public view. His name remains searchable. His dorm room remains a footnote in court records. Some stories don't allow anonymity. The broader public absorbs the case the way it absorbs most tragedies, briefly, emotionally, and then selectively. Online discussions erupt, fade, and move on. Some argue the sentence was too harsh. Others say it wasn't enough. But nearly everyone agrees on one point. Michael should never have been there. And that truth exposes something uncomfortable. Because this case isn't unique. It's familiar. It happens wherever adults underestimate risk, where minors are treated like peers, where responsibility is postponed in favor of convenience. The danger wasn't hidden. It was ignored. As the years pass, the story survives in court transcripts, news archives, and quiet conversations between people who remember. Michael Lamont becomes a lesson, not because he chose anything, but because others chose for him. And that may be the most difficult truth of all.
The question that never goes away.
In the end, this case does not leave us with answers. It leaves us with a question. One that lingers long after the courtroom empties, long after the dorm room is repainted, long after the names involved fade from public conversation. What changes if someone speaks up? Because when you strip this story down to its core, it isn't about a gun or a plea deal or even a sentence. It's about a series of moments where intervention was possible and didn't happen. A 14-year-old walked into a college dorm. That alone should have stopped everything. But it didn't. And once that line was crossed, every decision that followed pushed the outcome further out of control. No single person caused what happened, but multiple people allowed it. Fear played a role. So did loyalty. So did panic. So did the desire to avoid consequences. And in the seconds that mattered most, those instincts outweighed responsibility. Not because the people involved were monsters, but because they were human. And that's what makes this case uncomfortable. Because it forces us to look beyond guilt and punishment and ask harder questions. How often do we ignore warning signs because they inconvenience us? How often do we treat minors like peers instead of children? How often do we assume nothing will happen until it does? Michael Lamont did not choose this environment. It was chosen for him. And when things went wrong, the people who could have protected him chose themselves instead. That choice, more than any weapon, sealed the outcome. Justice, in this case, arrived in the form the system allows. Charges, plea agreements, sentences. But justice does not mean resolution. And it does not mean peace. Michael's family lives with an absence that cannot be quantified in years or rulings. A future that will never unfold. Moments that will never happen. They did not get closure. They got acknowledgement. And maybe that is why this story matters. Because it isn't rare. It's a warning. One that asks every viewer to consider where responsibility truly begins, and whether silence can ever be neutral. If there is a lesson here, it isn't about fear or punishment. It's about intervention. About recognizing when a situation is crossing a line, and choosing to stop it, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it's risky. Even when it costs something. Because the question this case leaves behind is not about the past. It's about the next time. The next party. The next warning sign. The next moment where someone has the chance to step in.
What will be different then?
Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. These are not easy stories to tell or to watch, but they matter. Every case shared here is about more than headlines. It's about real people, real choices, and real consequences that deserve to be remembered. If this documentary made you pause, reflect, or see things differently, consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to support the work, but to make sure stories like this continue to be told with care, context, and honesty. New documentaries are coming, and each one asks an important question we can't afford to ignore. Thank you for watching. And thank you for listening. Stories like this don't end when the video does. If you believe these stories should be told responsibly, subscribe. Because awareness is the first step toward prevention.